The plasma bolt seared past Jake Morrison's helmet with a whistle that sounded uncomfortably like his ex-wife's laugh, high-pitched and designed to make him question every life decision he'd ever made. He pressed himself deeper into the crater that used to be a fountain, watching the crystalline water spouts flicker between states of matter as the city's dying power grid sent random energy surges through the infrastructure. Morrison, remind me again why we couldn't have picked a nice, boring desert planet to get shotted on. Corporal Rivera's voice crackled through the comm, punctuated by another burst of enemy fire that turned a nearby statue of some six-armed alien philosopher into very expensive gravel. Because the desert planets don't have quantum archives full of classified hegemony data, Rivera. Also, the weather's terrible this time of year. Jake popped up long enough to return fire with his pulse rifle, watching the energy beam disappear harmlessly into the phase-shifted armor of a Zephyrian defense drone. Besides, I thought you liked the scenery. The scenery in question was the smoldering remains of Zephyria Prime's cultural district, where buildings twisted into impossible geometries and streets that had once been paved with living light now flickered like dying neurons. The air itself seemed to shimmer with colors that didn't have names in any human language, a side effect of the exotic matter that powered the city's reality-bending architecture. Private Zhang's nervous binary chatter cut across the comm channel. 1,000,000, 1,000, 1,100,000, 101. 1,101,000, 101,110,000. I mean, Sergeant, the drones are adapting to our firing patterns. They're learning. Course they are. Jake ducked as another plasma bolt carved a molten furrow in the alien metal beside his head. Wouldn't want this to be easy. Betty, please tell me you've got something explosive and inappropriate for the situation. They always do, Sarge. Betty Martinez's voice carried that particular note of glee that made veteran Marines either very happy or very concerned, depending on which side of the explosion they were standing on. But these beauties phase in and out of our reality. Hard to blow up something that's only mostly there. The defense drones circled overhead like mechanical vultures, their sleek forms shifting between solid matter and translucent energy fields. Each one was roughly the size of a small fighter craft, bristling with weapons that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They'd been harassing Jake's squad for the better part of an hour, ever since they'd breached the outer perimeter of the quantum archives. Zhang, how long until orbital bombardment turns this whole rock into a glass parking lot? 18 minutes, 43 seconds, Sergeant. Give or take a few seconds for relativistic calculations. Fantastic. Anyone else feeling like the universe has a sense of humor today? A particularly aggressive drone swooped low, its multi-phase cannon charging with a sound like reality tearing at the seams. Jake rolled left, came up firing, and watched his shots pass harmlessly through empty air as the drone shifted back to a parallel dimension just long enough to make him look foolish. This is starting to really annoy me, he muttered, ejecting his depleted power cell and slamming in a fresh one. The new cell hummed with enough energy to level a small building, assuming he could actually hit something that stayed in the same dimension long enough to be shot. Rivera's position erupted in a shower of sparks as a plasma bolt struck dangerously close. Morrison, I've got kids to disappoint when I get home. Can we maybe speed up the whole heroic mission completion part of this operation? Working on it. Jake studied the tactical display on his helmet's HUD, watching the drone's movement patterns. They were definitely learning, adapting their phase shift timing to stay just out of sync with human reflexes. Worse, more were arriving from the deeper parts of the city, drawn by the sounds of combat. The ground beneath them began to vibrate with a low, thrumming note that seemed to emanate from the planet's core. The crystalline spires that still stood began to resonate in harmony, creating an alien symphony that would have been beautiful if it weren't accompanied by the distinct possibility of violent death. Sarge. Betty's voice carried a note of concern that was deeply unsettling coming from someone who considered thermite a food seasoning. The city's quantum field is destabilizing. These readings are off the charts. Define off the charts, in terms I can understand while being shot at. Remember that time on Proxima Station, when the reactor core went critical, and we had to evacuate in our underwear? Yeah, this is worse, a lot worse. Like, reality might start coming apart at the seams worse. Jake felt his stomach drop somewhere in the vicinity of his boots. Zhang, update on that bombardment timeline. 15 minutes 12 seconds. The hegemony fleet is already charging their planet crackers. A drone materialized directly above Rivera's position, its cannon glowing with deadly intent. The corporal dove for cover, but not before the blast singed his eyebrows completely off, leaving him looking perpetually surprised. "That's it," Rivera shouted, his voice cracking with indignation. "I just got those eyebrows regrown after the incident on Kepler 442. Do you have any idea how long it takes to get good eyebrows?" Jake couldn't help himself. Despite the plasma fire, the reality-warping architecture, and the imminent planetary annihilation, he started to laugh. It began as a chuckle, then built into full-blown hysteria as the absurdity of their situation hit him all at once. "Morrison, have you lost your mind?" Rivera demanded, still patting his singed forehead. "Probably." Jake stood up, ignoring the immediate increase in incoming fire, and spread his arms wide to address the burning city around them. His voice carried across the quantum-warped landscape with theatrical grandeur. "You know what? I've had it with subtle approaches. I've had it with tactical thinking. And I've definitely had it with being shot at by robots that can't even stay in the same reality long enough to have a proper firefight." Another plasma bolt missed him by inches, but Jake was beyond caring. The stress, the impossible situation, and Rivera's missing eyebrows had pushed him over some invisible edge into the realm of magnificent stupidity. "So here's my new plan," he shouted to the burning sky, his voice echoing off the twisted spires. "If anyone out there wants to marry me, now's your chance. I'm single, barely injured, and I've got great health insurance through the Colonial Marines. What do you say, universe? Want to make this day even weirder?" His squad erupted in nervous laughter. Betty nearly dropped her explosive charges. Zhang's binary chatter shifted into what sounded suspiciously like electronic giggling, and even Rivera managed a grin despite his eyebrow situation. Then the flames around them began to move. Not the natural flicker of burning debris, but a deliberate, purposeful spiral that defied every law of physics Jake had ever learned. The fire rose from the ground in a perfect circle, spinning faster and faster until it formed a column of flame that reached toward the alien sky. The heat should have been unbearable, but instead the air grew cool, almost refreshing. Sarge," Betty's voice had gone very quiet. "I don't think that's normal fire behavior." The spinning column of flame began to part like curtains, revealing something that shouldn't have been possible. A figure stepped through from somewhere else entirely, somewhere that existed between the spaces of normal reality. Jake's laughter died in his throat as he found himself face to face with the impossible. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her pale skin seeming to absorb the firelight rather than reflect it, and when she moved, reality itself seemed to bend slightly around her presence. Her ears swept back in elegant points that marked her as something decidedly not human, while her midnight hair flowed like liquid shadow, despite the complete absence of any wind. "I accept your proposal, human," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries and the faint suggestion that she found the entire situation mildly amusing. Jake's jaw dropped so far it nearly dislocated. Behind him, he could hear Rivera making strangled choking sounds, while Zhang's binary chatter had escalated to what sounded like electronic panic. Betty, true to form, was the first to recover her composure. "Well, this is new," she announced cheerfully. "Anyone want to start a betting pool on whether Sarge survives the honeymoon?" Betty, not helping, Jake managed, his voice cracking like a teenager asking someone to prom. He cleared his throat and tried again. Look, lady, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but that was more of a rhetorical question. You know, gallows humor, a desperate attempt to maintain morale in the face of imminent death. The woman tilted her head, studying him with eyes that seemed to hold depths Jake couldn't quite fathom. Among my people, a public declaration witnessed by fire is considered a sacred vow. You called out to the universe and I answered. The bond is already forming. Bond? Jake's voice went up an octave. What kind of bond? Please tell me it's not the kind that involves blood or ritual sacrifice or... Blood is involved, yes. Rivera finally found his voice. Morrison, I don't know what you did to deserve this, but remind me never to make jokes when you're around. Your luck is apparently contagious and terrifying. My luck has nothing to do with... Jake paused as the Zephyrian defense drones, which had been circling overhead like mechanical death, suddenly powered down in mid-flight. They crashed to the ground with metallic thuds, their energy signatures going completely dark. Okay, maybe my luck has a little to do with this. The woman extended one pale hand toward him, her fingernails elongated into what could generously be called elegant claws. I am Lyrale of the Sanguinari. And you, I believe, are about to discover that fate has a sense of humor far more twisted than your own. Sanguinari, Zhang's voice went up 3 octaves. Sergeant, those are the vampire legends, yeah, I got that part. Jake stared at Lyrale's outstretched hand like it might spontaneously combust, which, given recent events, wasn't entirely out of the question. Question: when you say bond, are we talking metaphorical, spiritual, or actual physical, till death do us part kind of situation? Death would be a mercy compared to breaking a sanguinary marriage bond, Lyrale replied with what might have been a smile. The consequences tend to be quite creative. Betty perked up with interest. Creative how? Are we talking explosions? I love explosions. More along the lines of existing in a state of perpetual quantum flux until your consciousness fragments across multiple dimensions. Lyrale explained casually, as if discussing the weather. Though I suppose the subjective experience might involve something resembling explosions. Rivera sat down heavily on a piece of debris, his eyebrowless face a mask of resignation. Morrison, I want it on record that if you get us all sucked into some interdimensional marriage nightmare, I'm putting in for a transfer to the most boring desk job in the galaxy. Noted, Jake said faintly. He looked around at the ruins of the alien city, the smoking craters where the defense drones had crashed, and his squad of misfits who were all staring at him with expressions ranging from morbid fascination to barely contained hysteria. So, hypothetically speaking, what would it take to, postpone this whole marriage thing? Just until we're not in immediate danger of orbital bombardment. Lyrale's laugh was like crystal bells being dropped into an ice-cold stream. The bombardment has been postponed. The hegemony fleet received new orders approximately 30 seconds ago. They are now maintaining a safe distance while their xenobiology department attempts to determine what caused their sensor arrays to detect a Class Omega quantum signature. Zhang frantically checked his tactical display. She's right. The fleet just jumped out to the edge of the system. How did you? I may have influenced their decision-making process. Lyrale examined her claws with casual interest. Quantum manipulation becomes remarkably simple when one exists partially outside linear spacetime. Jake felt a headache building behind his eyes, the kind of headache that usually preceded either a brilliant tactical insight or a complete mental breakdown. Given his recent track record, he wasn't optimistic about which it would be. Right. Okay. Let me see if I have this straight, he said slowly. You're an interdimensional vampire with reality-warping powers who wants to marry me because I made a joke, and you've somehow convinced an entire hegemony battle fleet to back off by. What? Sending them a strongly worded quantum message. That is a remarkably accurate summary, yes. Rivera raised his hand. Question, does this marriage come with any benefits, dental, vision, immortality? Rivera, you're not helping, Jake snapped. I'm just saying, Morrison, your dating life has been pretty dismal lately. Maybe it's time to broaden your horizons. Think outside the species. The bonding process does confer certain advantages, Lyralay admitted. Enhanced physical capabilities, resistance to conventional weapons, limited precognitive abilities, and yes, extended lifespan. Betty's eyes lit up. Ooh, does it come with better explosives? Because if we're talking about enhanced physical capabilities, I have some ideas for shaped charges that would really benefit from supernatural strength. Betty, please don't encourage the interdimensional vampire, Jake pleaded. Why not? She seems nice. Terrifying, but nice. Betty turned to Lyralay with genuine curiosity. So how does this whole bonding thing work? Is there a ceremony? Do we need to find an officiant? Because Zhang knows a guy who got ordained online. 1,001,001. 100,000, 1,100,000, 101,101,111. I mean, it was for a joke. Zhang protested. I'm not qualified to marry anyone to anything, especially not to a quantum entity. The ceremony is quite simple, Lyralay said, her tone suggesting she was enjoying their predicament far more than was strictly appropriate. An exchange of essence, a binding of quantum signatures, and a ritual sharing of life force. Nothing too dramatic. That sounds absolutely terrifying, Rivera observed. I approve. Morrison needs someone who can keep him in line. Jake rubbed his temples, trying to process the situation. Let me ask a different question. What happens if I just say no, hypothetically? Lyralay's expression grew thoughtful. Well, the quantum flux would probably tear a hole in local spacetime. The planet would likely implode, and the resulting gravitational anomaly would drag the hegemony fleet into a collapsing wormhole. But on the bright side, you wouldn't have to deal with the awkwardness of interdimensional in-laws. In-laws? Jake's voice cracked again. My family is quite eager to meet you. They've been following your military career with great interest ever since you accidentally triggered that temporal paradox on Rigel 7. That wasn't my. So, Jake said, attempting to inject some semblance of normalcy into what had become the most surreal conversation of his military career. Assuming I don't want to accidentally destroy the space-time continuum, I guess we should probably get moving toward those quantum archives before something else decides to complicate our lives. Lyralay nodded gracefully and began walking through the ruins as if she owned the place, which, given her apparent ability to manipulate reality, she might actually have. An excellent suggestion, though I should mention that the path to the archives is somewhat non-linear. Non-linear how? Jake asked, falling into step beside her. His squad formed up behind them, with Rivera muttering prayers to various deities and Zhang running continuous scans on everything within a 50-meter radius. The Zephyrians built their city using folded space-time architecture. What appears to be a straight line through the streets might actually be a complex four-dimensional spiral that passes through several adjacent realities. Lyralay paused at what looked like a perfectly ordinary intersection, then placed her palm against the air itself. The space in front of them shimmered and folded, revealing a passage that definitely hadn't been there a moment before. For instance, this shortcut passes through a dimension where mathematics is slightly different, and gravity flows upward on Tuesdays. Betty clapped her hands together with delight. Oh, this is going to be fun. Do the explosives work differently in other dimensions? Only one way to find out. Lyralay replied with that same enigmatic smile that was starting to make Jake deeply nervous. They stepped through the dimensional fold, and Jake immediately felt his stomach perform a series of acrobatic maneuvers that would have impressed a professional gymnast. The world around them had taken on a distinctly surreal quality. Colors seemed more vibrant. Sounds echoed in harmonics that shouldn't have been possible, and the ground beneath their feet felt suspiciously like it might not be entirely solid. This is either the most amazing thing that's ever happened to me, or I'm having a complete psychotic break, Rivera announced, staring at a tree that was growing downward from what might have been a cloud. Either way, I'm oddly okay with it. Zhang held up his scanner and frowned at the readings. Sergeant, according to this, we're currently existing in 7 different locations simultaneously, moving backward through time at a rate of -3 seconds per minute, and somehow weighing exactly pi kilograms. Is that bad? Jake asked. I have no idea. The mathematics hurt my brain, and my brain has been surgically enhanced with quantum processors. Lyreley led them through the dimensional maze, with the confidence of someone who had done this countless times before. She paused occasionally to touch seemingly random objects, a streetlight that sang in a minor key, a fountain that flowed with liquid starlight, a park bench occupied by what appeared to be the philosophical concept of Tuesday having an existential crisis. Question, Jake said as they passed a building that was simultaneously under construction and being demolished. How exactly do you know so much about Zephyrian architecture? And please don't say it's because your family has been quantum stalking the entire galaxy for millennia. My people built most of the advanced dimensional technologies you see throughout this sector, Lyreley explained matter-of-factly. The Zephyrians, the hegemony, even your own colonial marines use equipment based on principles we established eons ago. We were the galaxy's engineers before we decided that everyone was too paranoid and violent to deserve nice things. Betty perked up at the mention of engineering. So you know how all this stuff works, because I've been wondering about the theoretical maximum yield for a quantum-enhanced thermobaric device, and... Betty, no, Jake interrupted. Betty, yes, Lyreley said with obvious interest. Quantum enhancement increases explosive yield by approximately 4,000%, though the blast tends to occur in multiple dimensions simultaneously. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, Betty whispered, her eyes going distant with what Jake recognized as her dangerous ideas expression. They emerged from a particularly complex section of folded space into what had once been a grand plaza. The quantum archives rose before them like a crystalline mountain, its faceted surface pulsing with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. The building seemed to exist in a state of constant flux, shifting between different architectural styles, as if it couldn't decide what it wanted to be when it grew up. Okay, that's definitely not normal, Rivera observed. Buildings aren't supposed to have identity crises. The archives exist in a state of temporal superposition, Lyreley explained. They simultaneously contain every piece of information that has ever been stored there, is currently being stored there, and will be stored there in the future. It's remarkably efficient, though somewhat confusing for organic minds to navigate. Zhang checked his mission parameters. We need to extract data files related to Project Mindbridge. Any idea where we might find those in a building that exists in every possible configuration simultaneously? 3rd floor, Section J, sometime next Thursday, Lyreley replied without hesitation. Though given the current temporal flux, Thursday might be occurring in the basement today. Jake stopped walking and turned to face his interdimensional fiancée with growing suspicion. How do you know exactly what we're looking for? Because I'm starting to get the feeling that our mission here wasn't quite as random as Command made it seem. Lyreley's expression grew thoughtful, and for the first time since she'd appeared from the flames, she seemed almost uncertain. Your species has a saying about fate versus coincidence, doesn't it? Something about the universe having a sense of humor. Please tell me you didn't orchestrate this entire situation just to meet me, Jake said with growing dread. Because if you collapsed a planet's defenses, influenced a hegemony fleet, and manipulated spacetime itself just to arrange a date, that's either incredibly romantic or absolutely terrifying. Why can't it be both? Rivera asked philosophically. The mission briefing your commanders received was influenced, Lyreley admitted. but not by me directly. My people have been monitoring several developing situations across the galaxy, and this particular convergence of events presented an opportunity to address multiple problems simultaneously. Betty lowered her explosive charges and fixed Lyreley with a suspicious stare. What kind of problems? Because in my experience, when interdimensional beings start talking about situations and opportunities, it usually means someone's about to try to destroy reality. Someone already is trying to destroy reality, Lyreley replied calmly. The question is whether we can stop them before they succeed. Jake felt that familiar sinking sensation that usually accompanied the revelation that his simple military mission was actually part of some galaxy-spanning conspiracy. Let me guess, Project Mindbridge isn't just a data extraction operation. It's related to whatever cosmic threat you're worried about. The Mindbridge project is an attempt to create a permanent link between organic consciousness and quantum probability fields, Lyreley explained. In the wrong hands, it could be used to rewrite reality itself according to the wielder's will. The hegemony believes they can use it to eliminate all opposition to their expansion. Zhang's enhanced brain processed the implications faster than his organic teammates. If someone could manipulate quantum probability fields directly through consciousness, they could make any outcome they desired the only possible outcome. Free will would become meaningless. The entire universe would become their personal sandbox. That sounds bad, Rivera said with masterful understatement. Like, worse than my first marriage bad. The hegemony isn't the only faction seeking this technology, Lyreley continued. There are older things awakening in the spaces between dimensions, entities that view your reality as nothing more than raw material for their own purposes. The convergence of these forces here now represents either salvation or absolute catastrophe for every sentient being in this galaxy. Jake rubbed his forehead, feeling another headache building. And somehow, my spontaneous marriage proposal is supposed to help solve this cosmic crisis. The sanguinary bonding process creates a quantum entanglement between consciousness and multidimensional space, Lyreley explained patiently. With a human anchor, I can manifest my full abilities in your reality without destabilizing local spacetime. Together, we become something greater than the sum of our parts, a being capable of opposing forces that exist beyond normal physical law. Betty raised her hand. Question: does this greater than the sum of our parts thing come with better explosives? Because I feel like I keep asking this and not getting a satisfactory answer. You will be able to create explosions in dimensions that don't technically exist, Lyreley assured her. Now you're talking my language, Betty said with satisfaction. The quantum archives turned out to be even more disorienting on the inside than they had appeared from the plaza. Jake found himself walking through corridors that existed in 17 different time periods simultaneously, past data storage units that hummed with the collected knowledge of civilizations that hadn't been born yet. I'm starting to understand why the Zephyrians had such a reputation for being insufferably smug, Rivera muttered, stepping carefully around a filing cabinet that was phasing in and out of existence. If I had access to information from the future, I'd probably be insufferable too. Zhang's enhanced processors were working overtime trying to catalog everything they passed. Sergeant, I'm detecting quantum signatures from at least 47 different species, including some that registers as theoretically impossible, and one that appears to be a sentient mathematical equation. Please tell me we don't have to interview the sentient math, Jake said. The equation is rather chatty, actually, Lyreley commented, pausing to nod politely at what looked like a complex integral floating near the ceiling. It's been trying to solve the meaning of existence for the past 3,000 years, and is convinced the answer involves more cowbell. Betty, who had been unusually quiet since learning about multidimensional explosives, suddenly perked up. Found it. She was standing in front of a crystalline data core that pulsed with ominous red light. Project Mindbridge files, complete with all the terrifying implications and apocalyptic consequences. Also, there's apparently a recipe for something called quantum cookies in here. Priorities, Betty, Jake said, though he had to admit he was curious about the cookies. As Zhang began the data extraction process, the air around them began to shimmer with warning patterns. The archive's defense systems had finally noticed their presence, and they weren't pleased about uninvited guests tampering with reality-threatening technology. Incoming hostiles, Rivera announced, raising his weapon as shadows began to peel away from the walls. And they looked grumpy. The shadows resolved into humanoid figures made of living darkness, their forms constantly shifting between different configurations of limbs and teeth. They moved with purpose and malevolent intelligence, surrounding the squad with military precision. Shadow constructs, Lyreley identified, her voice taking on a harder edge. Automated defense systems powered by harvested nightmares, remarkably effective against most organic species. Most? Jake asked, hoping she had a plan that didn't involve him getting married in the middle of a firefight. They're vulnerable to reality-altering abilities and extremely bad jokes. Fortunately, we have access to both. Lyreley stepped forward, and suddenly Jake could feel something fundamental shift in the fabric of space around them. Time for the abbreviated wedding ceremony. Now here, with the shadow monsters trying to eat us. Jake's voice went up several octaves. Trust me, Lyreley said, extending her hand toward him. This is going to be either brilliantly effective or spectacularly catastrophic. Those odds have got me this far, Jake admitted, taking her hand. The moment their fingers touched, Jake felt his consciousness expand in directions he didn't know existed. Suddenly, he could perceive quantum probability fields as clearly as color, see the mathematical structures underlying reality, and sense the shadow construct's fear as they realized they were no longer facing ordinary humans. Whoa, he managed, his voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to echo from multiple dimensions. This is either the best high I've ever experienced or I'm having the most elaborate hallucination in military history. But how do you feel about cosmic responsibility? Lyreley asked, her own voice now perfectly synchronized with his across several parallel realities. Honestly, terrified, but also oddly excited. Like I just got promoted to a job I'm completely unqualified for but desperately want to succeed at. The shadow constructs attacked, moving with predatory grace toward the newly bonded couple. Jake instinctively raised his hand, and reality responded to his will in ways that defied every law of physics he'd ever learned. The shadows froze in mid-leap, trapped in crystalline matrices of crystallized time. Did I just do that? He asked. We did that, Lyreley corrected. The bond works both ways. Your human adaptability and my quantum manipulation abilities create something unprecedented. Betty was staring at the frozen shadow creatures with obvious delight. Can you teach me to do that? Because I have some ideas about temporally locked explosive devices that would revolutionize modern warfare. Later, Jake promised, surprised to find he actually knew how to grant that request. Right now we need to deal with the bigger problem. Zhang's data extraction was complete, but the files contained exactly what they'd feared. Confirmation that the hegemony had successfully created a working mind-bridge prototype. Worse, they'd already begun testing it on captured alien psychics, slowly learning to manipulate reality through pure will. The testing facility is located in the Tau Ceti system, Zhang reported. They're planning to use the technology to rewrite the galactic political structure by simply willing all opposition out of existence. That's remarkably efficient, Rivera observed. Evil but efficient. There's more, Zhang continued grimly. The dimensional entities Lyreley mentioned. They're already making contact with hegemony researchers. Apparently, beings that exist outside normal spacetime find the idea of a reality-malleable universe very appealing. Jake felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on his shoulders like a particularly heavy backpack. So let me get this straight. We need to stop a galaxy-spanning empire from achieving godlike power, while simultaneously preventing interdimensional monsters from turning our universe into their personal playground. That's a remarkably accurate summary, Lyreley agreed. And we're supposed to do this as, some kind of quantum power couple. The universe does enjoy its sense of irony, Lyreley admitted. Jake looked around at his squad. Rivera with his singed-off eyebrows and perpetual pessimism, Zhang with his binary anxiety and enhanced brain, Betty with her explosive enthusiasm and complete disregard for conventional safety protocols. Then he looked at Lyreley, this ancient being who had literally stepped out of fire to accept his desperate joke as a marriage proposal. "You know what?" he said, feeling something fundamental shift in his worldview. 6 months ago, the most complicated part of my job was filling out requisition forms for ammunition. Now I'm quantum bonded to an interdimensional vampire and responsible for saving reality itself from cosmic horror. He paused, then grinned. Somehow this feels like a promotion. Rivera rolled his eyes. Only you would consider apocalyptic responsibility a career advancement. The way I see it, we've got advantages nobody expects, Jake continued, his confidence growing as he felt his expanded abilities settling into place. We've got Betty's talent for creative destruction, Zhang's enhanced processing power, Rivera's supernatural ability to survive anything through sheer pessimism. And now we've got reality-warping powers fueled by the universe's apparently twisted sense of humor. Don't forget the multidimensional explosives, Betty added hopefully. Especially the multidimensional explosives, Jake agreed. The hegemony is expecting to face conventional military resistance. They're not prepared for a squad of misfits with quantum superpowers and a complete disregard for the laws of physics. Lyreley's smile carried centuries of wisdom and no small amount of anticipation. "Shall we go save the galaxy, husband?" Jake tested the word in his mind and found it didn't feel nearly as terrifying as he'd expected. "Let's do it, wife. But first, we're definitely coming back for those quantum cookie recipes. If we're going to be cosmic guardians, we might as well have decent snacks." As they prepared to leave the archives, Jake realized that his desperate joke in the middle of a firefight had done more than just break the tension. It had fundamentally changed who he was. He was no longer just Sergeant Jake Morrison, career soldier with a talent for surviving impossible situations. He was something new, something unprecedented. A human who had chosen to embrace the absurdity of an infinite universe and found strength in accepting responsibility for protecting it. "You know," he said to Lyreley as they walked back through the dimensional maze toward whatever cosmic adventure awaited them,